My administration is working every day to make it easier for manufacturers to build, hire, and grow in America. We're removing job-killing regulations and lifting the burdens on American industry, like I would say, have never been lifted before.
All right, that was the president earlier today meeting with the National Association of Manufacturers. That was at the White House. Joining us now, a rare New York in-studio appearance. She is the counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. How are you? Good to see you.
Hi, Sean.
You doing okay? I got to see your husband. I haven't seen him for a while. He's going to be doing some work in D.C. too. You know what's amazing to me? So in the opening monologue tonight, I pointed out, all right, the speed of Trump, checking off promises, and I know we get caught up in, the media is obsessed that the health care bill didn't get finished. It will. And nobody ever talks about all the good things he's done. Like, for example, I was like so happy this week over the EPA regulations.
Well, that was huge. And he kept a promise to the coal miners, and he's allowing the EPA to focus on what it's supposed to do, air and water, and really unleash that energy production in a way that makes us less reliant on foreign sources, generates all types of jobs. People complain in this country, Sean, that nothing's made in the USA anymore. Energy is made here. It's under our feet. It's off our shores.
We have more than we'd ever need.
It's time that we invest in it. And the president has promised and is now making good on those promises through a number of executive actions to unleash clean coal and oil, natural gas, of course, and any number of different energy sources. But also this week, he started the Commission on Opioids, working with this new White House Office of American Innovation that Jared Kushner has put together to lead.
You're going to be on this, right?
So Governor Christie is the head of the commission, and I had the privilege of sitting in on a couple of the listening sessions. And for the first time since I got to the White House, I cried this week, which is saying a lot.
Oh, my gosh.
And it was because I listened to the stories
of
Vanessa and AJ and of Pam, and it was just so incredibly moving to hear their stories. In the case of Vanessa and AJ, both of whom are New Jersey residents, their success stories, they found treatment. We need to focus on interdiction and prevention.
That's also a promise that he made to the people in New Hampshire in particular, where they have been devastated as much as other parts of the country.
Look, opioids is a crisis, though, in this country that does not discriminate. It is touching every socioeconomic stratus.
Everybody.
Both genders, obviously.
Scary.
All ages, people who have graduated from college, who haven't, who have jobs, who don't. And it really is scary. And this is a president who's very committed to it, along with Governor Christie, who will be heading up the commission in this Office of American Innovation.
So I put this up earlier in the program. Just take a look. I mean, I know that it would have been nice if the Republicans, after 8 years, had a consensus bill. You know I'm very critical of how this was rolled out. But there's all these success. We'll pull it up on the screen. That is President Trump's agenda. He checks it off the list. I don't think I've ever seen a president get a lot done as much as he can do by himself. I wish Congress would get their act together and keep up with him.
It'd just be good if people got the message. I actually think when you look at some of the confidence numbers, it does show that people and job creators, the job seekers, and the job holders, Sean, all are seeing very good in this presidency so far. So if you look at that National Association of Manufacturers survey today, it's the highest it's been in 20 years. The man's been on the job for less than 3 months. It is a 93.3% confidence measure. 1 year ago, it was 56.6%. That's not a margin of error. That's not tinkering. That is a huge uptick in confidence. You saw recently the Home Builders Confidence Survey, highest in 12 years. The Small Business Confidence Survey in Gallup, highest in almost 10 years. And it just goes on and on. People feel good about spending their money.
Would you, like me, and I'm not trying to drag you into this fight, like to see Congress better prepared in terms of the legislation, have their caucus, their individual components, the moderates, the Freedom Caucus, the study group, the Tuesday group, the Saturday night go drinking group, you know, get on the same page?
I'm not aware of that one.
I just made it up. Be ready for these. These are not small items that he's tackling here on the economy and changing the tax code and infrastructure, even the energy thing. There's only so much he can do on his own. They've got to be ready to game up here.
Any one of these achievements would be historic. So if you think about just getting 2 or 3 even in the first year, it's huge. And we know that healthcare reform will happen. We know that the president and every single Republican in the House and Senate who are there campaigned successfully on repealing and replacing Obamacare. So the question is, what are the next steps? You're absolutely right. The conference needs to come together. But you know what I learned through this entire process? And Sean, I'm old enough to have worked against Hillary Care and Obamacare and all that slightly.
Yeah.
But you know, so I've been at healthcare for a long time. And what I learned from this particular process is that this is the price of success. This is a very diverse Republican conference. You have 23 Republican members who sit in districts that Hillary Clinton won. I mean, that's a pretty big thing. And so you have everybody from like a plus, you know, Republican 25 or 30 district, if you will, to a plus D, a single-digit district. So bringing together those diverse ideological and geographic viewpoints and just postures is very important. So look, people have to be brought from the table earlier. But I have to say, on this one, the president showed a great deal of leadership. He listened.
He almost got it over the finish line.
He worked the phones.
But they dumped a bill that had no consensus on his lap. Why did he have to do the heavy lifting when, in all fairness, the legislative branch had 8 years to campaign, run on this. They got the House in 2010, 2014 the Senate, 2016. Really, they didn't have a bill ready to go. That kind of makes me mad.
I'm confident that the conference will come together and that the deficit in votes was in the dozens. We started out at a deficit in the dozens and dozens, and it got shrunk down to about 12 to 18 votes, perhaps. So that's very heartening. But look, there were moderates who ended up not supporting it. There are conservatives who ended up supporting it. But that's the price of success for having a very diverse party. Look at the Democratic Party. Where are the pro-life Democrats, the blue dog Democrats, the pro-Second Amendment Democrats? They don't exist anymore. That party is much more myopic and the same now. They've been pulled to the left by some of their factions. But in the case of the president, some people would prefer him to be the closer on this and not the leadoff batter. Some people appreciated the fact that he and the Vice President, Secretary Price, Director Mulvaney, and others leaned in from the beginning and were very involved in the legislation.
They should have brought everybody in.
But it has to really represent, the legislation has to represent all of the disparate opinions, and most importantly, what the president has promised to do in repealing and replacing Obamacare. It's not sustainable, it's not affordable, so it will get done.
All right, good to see you. All right, so sometimes in life when things don't go exactly the way we want, people get frustrated, they get annoyed, and there's no more frustrating place on earth than Washington, D.C. So I get why the president is upset that Republicans couldn't hammer out this deal on health care last week. Now, the president, to his credit, he has a big, bold, aggressive agenda. See that list there? He's checking off his promises one after another. I say he's moving at the speed of Trump. Now, we have promised on this program to hold Washington accountable, and that means everybody. Now, while it's understandable, the president is frustrated over the GOP health care bill and it being pulled. I'm too, but I see it a little bit differently than he does. From my perspective, after 7 years, almost 8 years of Republicans promising to repeal and replace Obamacare, to me it is inexcusable they didn't build a consensus bill that was ready for the president. Now, the other big mistake is the Republican leadership, they kept everybody in the dark. Everyone was left guessing what's in the bill, what's in the bill. All these rumors were coming out. Oh, if this is in it, that's trouble. If that's in it, there's trouble. There was no consensus that was built behind the scenes. Now, the Republican leadership, they dumped this bill. They literally rolled it out and then left it to the president to close the deal. Well, guess what? That's not his job. Now, the president does deserve credit. He did his best to get it done, got very close, but they didn't get there. The legislative branch, though, from my perspective, they failed the president because they clearly were not prepared for this moment. Now, in the end, I do believe it is important to get the bill right rather than get it done fast. Now, some in Washington, they're trying to put all the blame on the Conservative Freedom Caucus, and as I said last night, I think this anger is misplaced. Now, if the Freedom Caucus had been consulted from the beginning and they didn't roll out the bill and they would have had a chance to see it beforehand, and leadership reached out to them from the get-go, I don't think we'd be in this situation. Now, sometimes we need to stand back and remember who our real friends are. Let me give you an example. Let's talk about Illinois Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Now, today he writes an op-ed for the New York Times titled, quote, "How the Freedom Caucus is Undermining the GOP," where he literally mocks the Freedom Caucus, literally end their name by writing, quote, "Interesting name for a group of about 36 members that refuses to let the will of the people advance on the House floor." Now, keep in mind, this is the same Adam Kinzinger who, during the election and prior to the inauguration, was mentioned in headlines like the one you see on your screen. The same Adam Kinzinger who in August said he wouldn't vote for Donald Trump. Watch this.
Donald Trump, for me, is beginning to cross a lot of red lines of the unforgivable in politics. And so, I'm not going to support Hillary, but, in America, we have the right to write somebody in or skip the vote and vote for Mark Kirk in Illinois, for instance. And that's what it's looking like for me today. I just don't see how I get to Donald Trump anymore.
And even following the election, Kinzinger played coy about who he actually voted for on November the 8th. Now, is Congressman Kinzinger, is he really the guy to be lecturing the Freedom Caucus who did support candidate Trump? I'm not buying that. Now, during the campaign, the Freedom Caucus chairman, Mark Meadows, he was a staunch ally of candidate Trump, now President Trump. In July in Greenville Online, they ran an article on Meadows that said in part, quote, Meadows initially endorsed Texas Senator Ted Cruz in the Republican presidential primary, but he is now embracing Trump with more gusto than others in the GOP. And according to Nate Silvers, 538, at least 29 of the 34 members of the House Freedom Caucus endorsed or at least voted for Trump in the election. And by the way, with all due respect to Speaker Ryan, Laura Ingraham, last night on this program, pointed out Ryan made it clear he wanted little to do with then-candidate Trump. So let's be clear. A lot of blame to throw around about the Republican health care bill being pulled, and infighting is not a solution to the problem. I also don't think President Trump reaching out to Democrats is ever going to work. The one thing I do know for sure, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Steny Hoyer, they're not the president's friends, and they do not want him to succeed in any way. Don't believe me? Listen to what they said about the president.
My view is he is far too tolerant and accepting the support of racists.
I think experience would tell us over the last 10 days and frankly the last 15 months, who knows? Who knows what President Trump is going to do at any given moment and give offense to people that we need to be have confidence in us, and we need to have confidence in our relationship with them.
Ineffective. They've accomplished nothing. He's the deceptor, the deflector in chief. He's deflected from the fact that he hasn't produced a jobs bill, hasn't produced an infrastructure bill, has accomplished nothing, and he just has to deflect by coming up with bans on certain religions.
All right, now the question is, where do we go from here? How do we solve the problem for the American people? Because this is a promise they made. Now, Republicans, in many ways, they need to go back to the drawing board and do what they should have done in the first place. They need to create a bill that will pass in the House, and that means the study group, the Tuesday group, the Freedom Caucus, moderates. They all need to be brought in a room, as well as senators, Secretary Price, the vice president, everybody included, and hammer out a deal. Get away from the cameras, and certainly don't go on television and negotiate in the public eye. Now, if they do these things, instead of pointing fingers at each other, then they'll have an opportunity to give the American people a bill that they really want, need, and desire, one that's going to lower premiums and offer better health care. There's the answer. Solve the problem. Remember the movie Disclosure? He talked about solve the problem, find the solution. Here was reaction.
Tensions rising on Capitol Hill over surveillance of the Trump team. Chairman Nunes and even the mainstream media in their own reporting have confirmed that intelligence agencies picked up Trump team communications. So what will it take for liberals to admit that the Obama administration maybe spied on the Trump transition team? Here to debate it is former senior director of the National Security Council under President George W. Bush, Michael Doran, and former State Department official under President Obama, David Tafori. Nice to see both of you this morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Thank you. Michael, why is the former president being so quiet on all of this?
I think he doesn't want to build the story. He's hoping it will go away, and if he weighs in, it'll just pump it up more. But I think it's not going to go away. David, you heard the reporting yesterday from our own Adam Housley that this could go very high in the former Obama administration. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, if there was leaking about Trump officials who were engaging in talks with Russian officials, and that leaking was classified and should not have been leaked, then we should investigate that. But we need to also draw a distinction between unmasking and leaking. Unmasking when an American official is talking to a Russian agent, as Flynn was, he was talking to the Russian ambassador about sensitive issues like U.S. sanctions against Russia. That unmasking is supposed to happen. In fact, our intelligence officials need to understand those conversations. That's what happened here. We now know that Flynn engaged in improper conversations. He's admitted to that. In fact, he had to resign as the national security advisor because of that. Now, that's something that the American people should be really concerned about. We need to be concerned about Russian interference in our election. That goes to the sanctity of our democracy.
Okay, Michael, what about that point?
What about let this investigation go forward?
All right, David, let me get Michael in on that point. What about the substance of those discussions may have led to the unmasking? Do you take David's argument?
No, I dealt with this material when I was a senior director in the National Security Council in the Bush administration, and we took unmasking very seriously. There's a process. You have to justify to the NSA why you want to unmask it, and then once you know that information, it should be very tightly held. It's something that you don't, most of the time, you don't have to find out who the individual is in order to understand the significance of the report. So I totally reject that argument.
David?
I can't believe he doesn't think that it's significant that our national security advisor in waiting was talking to Russia about U.S. sanctions against Russia and telling Russia that don't worry about those sanctions. As soon as we get in office, we're going to remove those sanctions. Russia does not have the U.S. interests in its heart. It is going against U.S. interests. It has an incursion in eastern Ukraine, has invaded the sovereignty of Ukraine. Those are things that the U.S. and our allies in Europe are very worried about. The national security advisor in waiting was talking to Russia about that. Those are the types of sensitive conversations that are exactly the type of conversations that need to be unmasked. Okay. We now know that Flynn had to step down because of it, and there may have been criminal wrongdoing, and that's why he's being investigated, and that's why we saw the news this week that he's asking for immunity.
All right, David, what about that point, that news of him asking for immunity? How important is the substance of those discussions, though?
Well, look, what happened was a senior official, probably in the White House, leaked Flynn's name to David Ignatius of the Washington Post and said he was meeting with Ignatius. That's a crime. That's a felony. And he also, in addition to leaking the name and committing this crime, he leaked it in support, the official leaked it in support of a lie, that Flynn was in collusion, that Trump was in collusion with the Russians, and that lie was told to nullify the effect of an election, and that's what we should be worried about, the use of national security secrets as a weapon in domestic politics.
Well, we're out of time, up against a satellite break here. Michael, David, great to have you both on this morning, and this debate will continue and unfolding. We appreciate you joining us. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Here was reaction, the author of the bestseller Treason, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, really, does this Freedom Caucus need to get lectured? You had a speaker that barely wanted to be seen.
Look, first of all, you hit it right in the head. The Freedom Caucus had probably the highest percentage of Trump supporters of any group in the House. They disagree about this one thing, and I think from their perspective, they probably think Trump was misinformed. Let me give you an example of something today that Nancy Pelosi doesn't get. The National Association of Manufacturers met with the president to share with him that their CEOs have the highest level of confidence in making new investments in the United States that they can remember in well over a decade. This follows other things that are going on. Despite all the noise in Congress, President Trump is making real progress, and he's getting things done. And every time you turn around, you see new signs of investment, new commitments to build things in the United States. I think that he's got to solve this legislative problem. My personal advice would be to start with infrastructure, and frankly, after the extraordinary fire in Atlanta last night, which is going to cause enormous traffic problems for the city for months.
That's disastrous.
It's a good reminder, an area you know well from the years you were down there. I mean, this is a good reminder that we got to rebuild our infrastructure. I think you start there, then you move to a tax cut bill, not just tax reform, and then you get to health care third. But right now, I think they're all gridlocked and too busy being mad at each other. They got to get over it, relax. This is the beginning of a long game. This is not the end of it. and we got lots of time to get lots of good things done for America.
No, and by the way, they've got to keep the promise. This is not optional. They can't let Obamacare implode. So, to me, it's very simple. You have to, if you're in leadership, show your members the bill before you unveil the bill publicly. Then you got to build consensus. I appreciate that there are moderates and different groups, study group, Tuesday group, Freedom Caucus. Everyone's got to work together. They got to hammer out a consensus. It would be wise for them to work with the Senate from the get-go so they don't end up in conference and the Senate bill and the House bill are two very different bills, and that then becomes another opportunity for it to fall apart. So bring everybody together, and while they're doing the things you mentioned, this can get done, right?
Yeah, I think it can get done. I also think if they do it right, they're going to shock all of us, because if you look at the collapse of Obamacare in rural America, I think Senator Heitkamp, who's a Democrat from North Dakota, might have a really hard time voting against a good Republican bill that was well designed. I think the same thing goes for the senator from Indiana, the senator from Missouri, the senator from Montana. I wouldn't automatically assume that they're just going to hunker down and decide to destroy themselves. They're up for re-election next year. And in parts of rural America, Obamacare is a total disaster, and we can do something dramatically better. And if the public understands it, which is the other half of this, the country has to believe in the bill if it's going to pass. Health is too big an issue to pass if the American people aren't with you.
But there is something to learn from this experience. I think, number one, you can't unveil a bill that nobody's seen. You have to bring the different groups in the Congress together. You should include the Senate so you don't have a problem in conference. And why would they have done it this way anyway? That makes no sense to me. They had, here's the frustrating part, 8 years.
Look, I have no idea how they end up like this. We used to follow a model of listen, learn, help, and lead. Or as somebody once said to me, you know, you get one mouth and two ears, and there's a pretty good hint there. And I think the fact is that people, when you're doing something this big, 1/5 of the economy, life and death for every American, you need to do it carefully, out in the open. People have to have a real sense of participation. You can't ram it through. And you can't assume that a small group of people know enough by themselves. That's what Obama did wrong. That's what Hillary did wrong back in the 90s. This is a really big, complicated issue. I think it's fixable, but and it may take 3 or 4 bills, all of which ought to be understood from day one. And I think that frankly, that's part of why I would shift and look at infrastructure and tax cuts, because you can do those while you're working through what needs to be done in health care. All 3 could be done this year if they're willing to work with the American people and have an open legislative process.
All right, sir. A great idea. Thank you. All right, from the very moment that Chairman Nunes made the bombshell announcement last week that he saw reports that proved surveillance was collected on President Trump and his transition team, well, liberals and members of the biased press, they've been out to get him. Now, just listen to what they have said about Nunes in just the past 48 hours. Watch this.
Sometimes it's just easier to explain it away by pure, good old-fashioned 100% grade A incompetence and stupidity. That just may be what we have here with Congressman Nunes.
Never seen anything like this amateur hour at work now. Here we go with the latest buffoonery from the Trump operation.
I do think that Devin Nunes is such a uniquely clueless individual and so out of his depth in this whole investigation that ascribing too much planning and motive to him might be wrong.
The Nunes piece is going to get even more interesting and more baffling than it is now if you consider a couple of things. First of all, his crazy behavior. Everybody has read about that.
You get this? The mainstream alt-left propaganda destroy Trump media. They're trying to distract the country by going after Nunes and questioning his credibility. Now, by doing that, they are ignoring the real story and what we should all be talking about, because what Nunes has revealed about the leaks, the unmasking of American names, and, of course, the surveillance of the Trump team, this could end up being the biggest scandal in decades, if not ever, to hit Washington. Now, the big question is this. Did the Obama administration knowingly surveil the Trump team and incoming opposition party? Now, as Nunes said on this program last week, additional American names were amassed, and he saw the reports, and he said they had nothing to do with Russia and collusion. And this should concern every single lawmaker, every single journalist, and every American. And today, Fox's own Adam Housley is reporting that the two individuals who showed Nunes the information at the White House, they had nothing to do with the outing of this information. In fact, here's what Adam reported earlier today. Take a look.
The person who did the unmasking, I'm told, is very well known, very high up, very senior in the intelligence world, and is not in the FBI. We're also told the people who helped Devin Nunes navigate were the two individuals that the story was reported yesterday about, but they were not his sources. It was a navigation situation. And the reason why they had to navigate, I'm told, is that Nunes learned about this unmasking and who this was taking place back in January. And before Trump's tweet, before he met with the president, and it took, obviously, a number of weeks to try to figure out a way for him to see this intelligence because the agencies were stonewalling, we're told, to allow him and others to see it. Now, this is all coming from folks that are in these agencies and frustrated with the politics that's taking place in these agencies.
You hear that? The Trump White House had nothing to do with this. His reporting, Adams' reporting, is huge. Now, Democrats and the destroyed Trump media, well, they are doing a disservice, once again, to you, the American people, by attacking Congressman Devin Nunes instead of reporting on what the scandal is. Here with reaction.
Syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer about all this. And, Charles, let's start with Mike Flynn, his lawyer, seeking immunity for any testimony before Congress of the FBI, and then Donald Trump's tweet saying that's exactly the right thing to do, seek immunity. Where does that take this case?
Well, it's not going to depend on the Trump tweet, although I think it's not a very good idea for the president to inject himself into this. It's not going to help. I think the fact is very simple. If the FBI or any of the committees think that Flynn can deliver Trump, they will grant him immunity. There's no reason to think he will. If it's just protecting himself, I think they won't be interested in granting him immunity. In other words, he's only useful to the extent that he gets the big fish. That's how it is in all of these investigations. So I think this has to do with Flynn's own exposure, not having registered as an agent of the Turkish government. Perhaps some dealings with the Russians that predate his involvement in the Trump campaign that we don't know about. I suspect it's personal stuff. It's not campaign stuff, and it's not going to help the investigation of Russian tampering.
Then we've got the White House offering, and today Devin Nunes, Adam Schiff, the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee, as we saw, taking them up on their offer to go to the White House, to the NSC, to see the intelligence that Devin Nunes got to see. But that only happened after the New York Times reported that, in fact, it was the NSC that gave Devin Nunes the information in the first place.
Look, the tick-tock on the history of this is disturbing and puzzling. But in the end, all that matters is what Schiff says that he saw. Is he going to come out, and I suppose over the weekend he'll be on the shows, will he come out and say, there is stuff here that's troubling, there appears to have been some improper unmasking and improper spreading of this intelligence, or will he say that there's nothing here? That, to me, is what's important, and I find it really childish for the two sides to be arguing, your issue is a distraction, only my issue counts. There are two charges here. One, that the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians, and the other is that the Obama administration misused intelligence information. Why is one a distraction from the other? Why can't somebody stand up and say, they're both legitimate issues, we need to investigate to both? There's this implication, particularly in the media, that unless you're talking about the alleged collusion, all you're doing is distracting. Is not the unmasking of Americans a real issue? Of course it is. And if this were the only issue, the media would be all over it.
I want to pick up on exactly that issue because you've been talking about it for a while, and I know you're troubled, and look, you should be. It would, if it's true, be a crime, the unmasking of American officials swept up in intelligence gathering. The New York Times reports today, and you can take it or leave it, but they report today that most of the unmasking, the great part of it, was foreign ambassadors or foreign officials talking amongst themselves about having contacts, trying to develop relationships with members of the Trump transition, and that if you read it, you could kind of guess which Trump official they wanted to develop a relationship with. Perfectly innocent, perfectly normal relationship with a new administration. If that's all this is the unmasking such a big deal?
Well, it depends what the content is. If you have one ambassador saying to another that an important person in the White House prefers macaroni and cheese over steak, that's not important. If you have him saying that this person in the White House wants to work out a deal with the Russians over Syria or whatever, or has been collaborating in some way with the Russians or with others, that's real. Look, the reason we've been having these arguments that are circular, we've been chasing our tails on this for 3 weeks, is, let's be honest about this, we don't know a damn thing about what's
exactly
really
right.
happening. There are stories that are coming out every day. Everybody who's giving them out, particularly the ones in the intelligence community, are trained to lie. So until this is all over and we hear the testimony, we have no idea.
The infamous Hall of Mirrors. Charles, thank you.